This week on Jared's Got Outdoors, I'm back to the South Fork and we're hoping to catch thousands of rainbows. Stay tuned. Welcome to Jared's Got Outdoors, your source in the field for local outdoor news. As I mentioned before the break, this week on Jared's Got Outdoors, as you can see, we're back to the beautiful South Fork. Now, I'm actually hooking up with the Fish and Game, and we are trying to catch literally thousands of rainbows. I don't know how many they'll actually get today. This is an ongoing process, but we've actually got 3 boats that are going to be electro-fishing rainbows, and they're hoping to catch as many as they can. Now, there's obviously quite a story to this, and we're going to get into it as the show progresses, so let's get after it. As I said earlier, today I'd be with the Fish and Game. So meeting up at the Idaho Falls office first thing in the morning, I found that there would be a lot of people on this project today. Loading up in several vehicles with multiple boats, we all headed out towards the South Fork of the Snake River. Once to the boat ramp, everyone put on their waders and also got the boats ready, as well as some of the specialized gear for what was about to take place. For example, they'd have some makeshift fish tanks on the boat, and they'd need to keep those oxygenated. With the initial things ready, the boats were offloaded into the river. Even though this has been going on for 6 weeks, there was no dilly-dallying around here. Everyone was moving fast as daylight was burning and there was a lot to do. They were down to just 1 week left on this project and needed to get as many rainbows as possible. Brett and I were the only ones not in a boat set up for electrofishing, but it was still all we could do to keep up with the crews who were already upstream getting the rest of the electrofishing gear ready to roll. You may have seen the long rods hanging off the front of the boats. Well, now you can see they're there to hold the setups that would hang electrified wires in the water. Yep, everything you've always heard about not mixing electricity with water, and here they're doing it on purpose.
Alright, so what they're doing now is they're putting the anodes on, which are those PVC bars with the cables coming off. The anode is part of the electrical current, and then the metal hole is the cathode, the other half of the electrical circuit. And pulsed electricity coming off the generator, and then the magic box that lets us control the frequency of the pulses we're putting in the water and how much voltage we're putting in the water will actually make the fish swim towards those cables that are dangling off the front of the boat. So the people that are up in front on the bow of the boat with the long nets, then they take the nets, hurry and net those fish out of the water, put them in a live well in the boat, and keep going until you fill your live well.
So I've been with Brett. It's been a few years since I've been with Brett before doing this a few different times, and he's explained this every time. It still is above my pay grade. I'm glad Brett understands it. However, the gist is, you shock the fish, it makes them swim towards it, and you hurry and net them and get them out of the water before they're injured, throw them in the live well. But it's really fun to be part of this and see this when you're doing it. It's a lot of fast-paced action, trying to get the fish, get the right fish. You know, there's several different species here, and of course they're targeting rainbows today. And so it's pretty fun and fast-paced if you're on the boat doing the netting. Now they were 100% ready, and so they pushed off and spread out on the river. We followed one of the crews into this big, deep eddy, one of those spots that's sure to hold lots of fish. But there was a catch. The deeper the fish are in the water, the less the electrified current affects them. So if they can swim into deeper water as the boat approaches, they won't be affected at all. That's what appeared to happen here. They did get an occasional fish here and there, but the fast-paced action I told you about was non-existent. They gave it a try anyhow, and one of the other crews even came in from above, but it was still just a fish here and a fish there. When the third crew showed up and pushed ashore, we found out they were having electrical problems, which meant they couldn't do any work until they fixed the issue. So we'd follow the other crew that was still working. Out of the eddy, this crew hung just off the shoreline. This helps kind of trap the fish between the boat and the shore so they can't swim as easily into the deeper water. Now you'll notice as soon as they net a fish they want, they'll swing around and drop it into the boat. There's actually a big tub full of the oxygenated water I was telling you about earlier to hold the rainbows until they could be worked through a little later. I'll show you that part in a while. Now what you're not seeing from this angle is all the fish they're not netting, because once again, they're only after the rainbows and the river is full of other species as well. This bald eagle, or maybe even more than just one, was always around us in the beginning of the day. Brett said that the eagles have learned to keep close to them as they work because they know a stunned fish is easy prey. The whitefish seem to be particularly vulnerable to the electricity, and so they get temporarily stunned a little more than the others. This eagle stayed close to us, and at one point I looked back downstream just in time to see it swoop down and most likely come away with one of those whitefish. It was too far away to tell, but it sure looked like it got one. Now, as you can tell, it's pretty important that the netters are on top of their game in order to catch these rainbows. However, you might underestimate how important the driver is. It's actually the driver that probably has the biggest impact on how many rainbows they catch. He's not only got to read the water, but he's got to get the electrodes in the right area and then make sure the netters are in a position to be able to get the fish. As I watched, I was actually quite surprised at how much maneuvering the drivers had to do all day long. With all three crews back to work now, the fishing was getting pretty fast. It was all the netters up front could do to keep up with all the fish they were seeing as they tried to spot the rainbows and tell them apart from the others in the little time they had to react. With a bunch of fish in what we'll call the live well on the boat, it was time to work through them. Heading to shore, they didn't waste any time. With 2 nets, they sorted through the fish. Any cutthroat that was caught by accident was thrown back in the river. All the rainbows were scanned for pit tags, or if you recall from past episodes, money tags. Over the past several years, the Idaho Fish and Game have tagged hundreds and hundreds of rainbows with tags worth anywhere from $50 to $1,000 as incentive to keep the rainbows. Well, if the scanner picks up any of those tags in a fish, it's also put back in the river, so anglers will still have the opportunity to catch them. All the rainbows that weren't tagged are put into a live trap just outside the boat in the river. The other crews will also use this live trap, as well as a few others, when they're ready to work through their fish.
Well, we're out here today doing our rainbow trout suppression efforts, and what we're trying to do is decrease the number of rainbows in the river. Our management plan and our goal is to allow cutthroat, our native fish, to be our dominant species in this South Fork of the Snake River. And right now, rainbow trout have taken over that role. So we're helping out anglers. Anglers do a wonderful job harvesting fish, and we encourage that. But harvest alone hasn't been enough to keep that population of rainbows in check. So we're trying to get about 30% of the population this year, and that should be enough to cause the rainbow numbers to decline. We're at a record number of rainbow trout in South Fork, so even though we are taking out a large number of fish, the reality of it is the number of rainbows that are left in the river are going to be somewhere near our 10-year average, and just help us maintain our native cutthroat trout and conserve them.
When another crew did stop in to work through theirs, I found they had slightly different instructions. They were doing the same thing as the last, but with a few added steps. This crew also had the job of getting some data that they could use later as they monitor growth rates and such. So these guys would scan for the pit tag, then measure the rainbow. After that, a quick weight was done, and then it could be added to the others in the live trap. They also attempted to determine the sex of the fish as they hurried through the process. Of course, all the data was recorded so they could input the information later on when they were in the office.
I would say sex unknown, 372, 506.
So the rainbows that we're removing from the South Fork, we are taking to a number of different places that could use a few rainbows. So we're taking from a place that has too many rainbows and transporting and transplanting to places that could use a few more rainbows. Most of these rainbows are going to the lower Henry's Fork. Far enough away from the South Fork, they're not going to swim back around and into the river. Of course, we're going to monitor that with some tags, but don't anticipate that to be the case. Most of the fish are going to Henry's Fork, but we have also stocked a few ponds, the pond in Swan Valley, Lewis Pond, Trail Creek Pond, and G. Moore Pond out in Roberts. And then we've taken a couple loads out to the Big Lost, the lower Big Lost, where numbers have been low on rainbows. So all those places are being the beneficiaries of our efforts, and we're getting a few new fish, as well as hopefully those fish will spawn in those locations and produce even more fish for those anglers in other waters.
Now that you know what this project is all about, let's have a little fun and see how they catch these rainbows from a better angle. Look at all those fish. Remember I mentioned that whitefish seem to be affected more than others? This is what happens when you go through a school of whitefish. However, you can see that there are a few other trout in the mix. As I mentioned, some of these fish seem to get stunned. It's nothing to worry about because they'll actually come out of it and swim off here in a little bit, unless there's a hungry eagle or osprey up above. I want to take just a minute to talk to you about this. Is it controversial? Yes, it is. There are actually some people that don't want this to happen. Everybody's entitled to their opinion and stuff, and if you look at it, I can understand. If you're fishing the South Fork and you fish it regularly, rainbows are hard fighters. And so, if you hear they're going to take out 12,000 rainbows, you're going to be like, dang. Those are those big, hard-fighting fish that we, like to go fish. Or if you're taking clients out and things like that, they might have some feelings against this program here. However, you have to look at the big picture. It's always about the big picture. And in this situation, it's the Fish and Game's duty to try to keep the native fish here and to keep their populations up. Rainbows were introduced back, I think, in the 80s, and they just took off. They just took off and went crazy. And so the river can only hold a certain amount of fish. And if you're gaining rainbows, it means you're losing cutthroat trout. And that's what happened. The rainbow population went up, cutthroat trout went down, and then it kind of became this, hey, we've got to deal with this situation. And so over the years, they've been trying lots of different things. Some things work better than others. And in the end, however, the rainbow trout just recently skyrocketed again. And so they had to get even a little more aggressive. And that's what this is just getting more aggressive. As Brett mentioned, bringing this population down just by this 30% still gets it to just the 10-year average. So it's not like you're changing populations a lot, but the big picture is, if they can keep this up, if every year they can decrease the population by 30%, the rainbow trout population is going to start to decline, and of course the cutthroat population is going to increase. And so you're still going to have the same amount of fish in the river. We're just hoping to to make this into a cutthroat population majority versus the rainbow thing. So it's all about looking at the big picture. Of course, you're gonna have times that it just doesn't quite work out as planned, and so they adjust and accommodate accordingly. But that's the big picture. And why am I bringing this up? On social media, I see a lot of times when people start ripping on the Fish and Game. I've got buddies that rip on the Fish and Game. Every time they don't draw the tag they were hoping to. You know, people gripe about the draw system. People gripe about this system. People gripe about how they're handling certain hunts or depredation hunts and things like that. And yes, I do kind of have maybe skin in the game because I've got friends that are Fish and Game. And with that being said, with them being friends and I know them and I talk to them, you know, I know how often they draw hunts. They don't draw hunts any more often than we draw hunts. They're people that love to fish. They're people that love to hunt. That's why they're in this job. You know, they're getting paid like a teacher salary. This is not something they go into for the money. This is something they go into because they love the outdoors, they love the wildlife, they love the fisheries and things like that. And so they're coming here, they're getting their education, they get quite an education, and then they do everything they can with that education to try to make the best choices and the best, you know, possible scenarios for us. And they're really under a microscope. So every little thing that they do, the whole population of Idaho that's hunters or fishermen have them under a microscope and see everything. They always see the negative and not the positive. So I just want to throw this out there. Hey, I appreciate the Fish and Game. No, it's not always perfect. I don't rip on them, however. Even things that I disagree with, there are certain things that they do hunts-wise and stuff that I'm like, really? But, you know, they're the ones that have the expertise and they're seeing things and they know what their end goal is. I don't. And so I'm not going to get on there and harp on them. So I hope you guys, you know, don't do the same thing. It's just like police. Why are we harping on the police? We shouldn't be doing that. I full-heartedly support the police. Fish and Game are kind of in the same boat. They're doing their best they can. Are they perfect? No. But they are doing their best they can. And so this is one of those things. Like I said, it's controversial. There's a small population that doesn't like this. However, the end goal here is sustaining and getting that cutthroat population up, just like their end goal is with all the other things. They love hunting, fishing, and that's their goal, is just making sure that we in Idaho have the best possibility for outdoor recreation. Well, that's going to wrap it up this week. I hope you enjoyed seeing just a little bit of what the Fish and Game are out doing, trying to improve the fisheries. Of course, they're doing lots of other things with the wildlife and habitat and things like that. There's all kinds of projects and things that they are working on. Trying, you know, in reality, doing this for us, for the sportsmen that are out there buying the fishing licenses and the hunting licenses and things like that fund the Idaho Fish and Game. Anyways, I always enjoy coming out with them and I appreciate what they do.